Welcome back to Old School Sports, and we are beginning a new series here. No, it's not going to be a long play. Not going to be playing with the Minnesota Vikings for an extended period of time, but with Front Office Football 9 now out and available. What I'm going to do over these next few episodes is something I'm calling Anatomy of a Season, and I'm just going to kind of dig into the new game and kind of walk through what you do in FOF9 in each stage of the season. Hopefully, this can serve as a bit of a tutorial for those who are newer to the game, and hopefully for those of you who are wondering whether or not you should purchase this game, taking a look at some of these episodes and exactly what the game looks like under the hood will hopefully help make that decision a little bit easier for you. Pick the Vikings because I think they are a team whose season could go in a few different directions. They were one of the top teams during the regular season last year in 2022, made the playoffs where they were, of course, dispatched by the Giants. But despite Detroit on paper and in the real world thus far in 2023 looking like by far the best team in the NFC North, it's conceivable as I do this playthrough of a season that Minnesota could be competing for a division title or at the very least a playoff spot. But it's also conceivable that this team could get off to a relatively slow start. Maybe Kirk Cousins gets injured in this sim as he gets injured in real life. And this team could certainly be struggling, and perhaps 5 or 6 weeks into the season, also be in a position where I might want to be sellers and see if Minnesota had decided to sell Kirk Cousins, what maybe they could have gotten for him. And there's also a chance that this team just kind of ends up in no man's land as a kind of 7, 8, or 9 win team that's on the periphery of the playoff race all season, but not really a true contender, but also not a team that really wants to sell. So it could go in a lot of different directions, all of which could be interesting. If we end up selling this year, we'll be able to hopefully pick up a few extra draft picks to use next spring, which would be interesting if we're competing for a division title or a playoff spot. Maybe we instead are making trades as we approach the trade deadline to try to ensure that Minnesota does get into the playoffs. So should be interesting to follow, and hopefully it will be useful to those of you trying to either pick up how to play this game and or decide whether you want to buy the new version of Front Office Football. So in this episode, we're just going to take a look at the activities that the team is involved in the preseason, getting ready for our season to start against Tampa Bay on September 10th. So really only a little over a month to play. Today is the playbook deadline. That is an area that those of you who know me well from other series know that I'm more of a GM type player than a coach or manager type player. So I don't spend a ton of time editing the playbooks. You can see right now there are 200 plays in Minnesota's repertoire, 48 run, 118 pass, and 34 run pass option plays. A whole bunch of different formations, different personnel sets, different kind of fits with various types of offensive philosophies. So I'm just going to go with the defaults for here. I'm going to let my offensive coordinator, Wes Phillips, ultimately do the heavy lifting for me here. You can see, though, there are options to add new plays, edit plays, delete plays, generate an entirely new set of plays, erase the entire playbook. You can get extremely involved in this aspect of the game if you want, given that I'm not intending to be playing Minnesota for longer than one season, and I don't have any particular allegiance to the Vikings. or interest in digging deep into their playbook. Not something that I'm going to spend any time on here, but for those of you who are so inclined and like to kind of build and develop a playbook, and if you like to do that, you're probably also the type of player who likes to play out games snap by snap and make those decisions in the heat of the action. This is certainly an area that probably merits some of your time. And we'll take a very high level look at some of the top players on our roster here. Current and future overall ratings are a way that I like to search. Ryan Wright, the best player on the teams in terms of his ability relative to his position group. Justin Jefferson, not surprisingly, an extremely highly rated player. Brian O'Neill at right tackle. Danielle Hunter at linebacker. Kirk Cousins, not surprisingly, is a highly rated quarterback. Cameron Bynum at free safety. Greg Joseph, a decent kicker. Dean Lowry, see him as having some pretty good potential to get even better at defensive end. Long snapper Andrew DePaula. Harrison Phillips and Harrison Smith, both solid defensemen. And then there's a few players that have some higher levels of potential. One of whom is the cornerback Mekhi Blackman. Somewhat disappointingly to me, if I were to be a Minnesota Vikings fan in this playthrough, is that it does not appear that Jordan Harrison has an incredibly high ceiling in this random start to the game. That would be a little disappointing given how well he has been playing for the Vikings, particularly since Mr. Jefferson went down with his injury. Udo, the right tackle, looks like he's got some potential. Jay Ward, Andrew Booth, think some of those guys could get better. We will be making some cuts soon. We're going to have to get down to 60 players on the roster before that first game of the exhibition season against Seattle. Taking a look broadly at the position groups, don't have a lot of depth at quarterback. That's not something we're going to likely be able to fix through the free agent market right now. Running back, not particularly strong. Honestly, TJ Hawkinson only being a 40 rated player this time through would be another aspect that's disappointing to me as a Vikings fan. Looks like some pretty decent receivers, obviously led by Jefferson, who's arguably the best receiver in football right now. Looks like a decent offensive line, decent special teams with the punter and the kicker. A few useful parts on the defensive line, some good linebackers, some decent depth there, and then safety pretty solid with Bynum and Smith. Cornerback, some decent potential and upside with Murphy and Blackman, as well as a lot of useful parts potentially among some of these other cornerbacks who are on the team. If I was running this team for the long term, probably would be a lot more strategic about how I am thinking about the roster. But right now, just in an effort to kind of show some of the different options that are out here, I'm going to take a look at who's available on the free agent market and just look at supplementing this Vikings roster with some potential talent that's available for a few dollars. So to peruse the free agent market, we go to player acquisition and can either go to find a player or top free agents. Find a player just kind of shows everybody. So right now we're searching for available players on current, or we're searching on current value. That could kind of show us the top end guys available. Seems like there's always some pretty highly regarded long snappers available, but a couple guys interesting to me. Again, if I was playing this for the long term, I don't know that I would hit the free agency really hard because I don't know that all of these players are even real players at this point. But given that this is more of a tutorial and we're trying to make the Vikings as competitive as possible for this season that we're going to be playing with them, gonna try to at least go through the anatomy of acquiring some players. So Jeremy Hema here is a pretty strong inside linebacker. You can see he's exceptional with his pass rush technique, pretty good pass rush strength, but a pretty versatile player who's not really bad at anything. Looks like he could be a pretty useful middle linebacker. He's also a decent special teams player. Have to see exactly what he is looking for in terms of his contract demands, but this is a guy who could be interesting for us to bring on just in terms of adding some quality player to the team. You can see he's pretty middling in terms of the risk profile of his different potential injury areas. No statistics, no game logs since we are just starting. No offer can be made at this time of the season. I guess we've got to move past the playbook deadline, so I will do that first, and then we will re-engage with Mr. Hema. And we did sim ahead past the playbook day, just one day, and you can see it brought us right to this screen to offer him a contract. We've got a ton of cap room available. He's not looking for an exceptional amount of money. I'd like to try to bring him on board for more than just 1 year with the fact that I think he's a pretty useful player and also just always interesting to learn how the dynamics of contract negotiation work in a new game. So he was looking for 510,000 signing bonus and 1.99 million, so 2.5 million for a 1 year contract. So we're going to likely need to increase that bonus pretty significantly to get him to sign a potential 3-year deal. So right now we've got a 3-year deal out there, $2 million bonus to sign with us, and then $2 million this year, 2.5 next year, $3 million the year after. Not sure whether he'll be interested in that length of contract, but that's kind of the whole point of walking through these dynamics, to start finding out for myself and, more importantly, finding out for any loyal viewers who are watching how the dynamics of this work. So you can see 2.66 million cap cost this coming year would be 3.16 a year later, and then 3.66 in the 2025 season. We'll go ahead and make that offer to Jeremy. Our exhibition season limit, as we talked about, is 60, but we're going to be cutting some of the lower rated players, so we're happy to continue with the offer. And his client is looking for more money in the later seasons and a bigger overall salary in order to sign. So the bonus, we seem like we are in decent shape on. Again, I don't know if I would be doing this aggressively if I was really building a team for the long term, but we're going to increase each of those salary amounts by $500,000 a year. Make a revised offer, and still looking for a bigger overall salary to sign. One of the things that I don't love about the user interface, as you can see, I'm just typing in these numbers here. I wish there was maybe a increase 100,000, increase 1 million kind of button around, because the little arrows here, as you can see, are just $10,000 each. So a lot a lot of potential carpal tunnel generating clicking if you're going to be going from 5 million to 6 million, click, 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 rather than just typing in that amount. So need to use the keyboard a little more than I'd like to in a perfect world with this, but not the end of the world. And now we're very close to what he's looking for. Wants a little higher salary in the later seasons of the contract. Conceivably, those are years that we might be getting out from anyways. If it doesn't work out, we're going to be paying $667,000 a year for the next 3 years in terms of the guaranteed signing bonus. But those other salaries aren't actually guaranteed for those future years, so the cap hits if we were to move on from him would not be incredible. So we'll bump both 24 and 25 up $500,000, make the offer to him, and he still wants a little more in these later years. I'm trying to make this simple and get it over with and avoid this episode being incredibly long without any real big payoffs. So we'll bump up the offer a little bit more, and finally, success. Jeremy will accept our offer, select yes to finalize our contract. He is on board. Taking a look at the Vikings roster, certainly with that skill set and those abilities, he will be in the mix to likely play strong side or weak side inside linebacker for us, depending on what our defensive coordinator decides he wants to do with him. So we're going to try to make a couple other free agent signings, and there obviously are some real players. Looks like Von Miller, Shane Ray, Trevor Siemian, some familiar-ish names are free agents for whatever reason at the start of this game, but I don't know about all of these rookie long snappers. My assumption is that these are probably not all real NFL players, but I don't know that for a fact. They very well might be. We are going to try to bolster Minnesota's backfield as well. That was a bit of a weak area, and Braxton Morlando is a pretty highly regarded fullback. Incredible strength. Excellent special teams player, which is nice. Looks like he can play running back or tight end in addition to his primary position being fullback, where he's most competent. Certainly would be interested in bringing him on board. He's looking for signing bonus and then $870,000, which looks like it's the league minimum. The nice thing about these, if you're trying to offer a player a multiple year contract, if you just kind of click the up arrow on the season, they'll put in the minimum salary amount for a player with that level of experience, so that makes it a little bit easier. We'll try to see if we can also sign him to a 3-year deal, basically offering him the minimum for each season in terms of his base salary, but he is going to get $150,000 a year in terms of a signing bonus from us. Make that offer to him, and he has accepted it. So Braxton Morlando also going to be in the mix for the Minnesota Vikings. And we'll, just for the fun of it, try to bring in one more player here as we get closer to the start of the preseason, or more accurately, the exhibition portion of the preseason. And I don't know that the Vikings really need Von Miller, but given that Von Miller is an incredibly accomplished NFL player, 13-year veteran at this point, still pretty good with his pass rushing technique, but really kind of a one-dimensional pass rusher at this point, although he also is a good run defender. Really kind of just more interested in anything and seeing what type of money Von Miller is looking for. And it's actually surprisingly low. Says that he's just looking for a $530,000 signing bonus and $1.65 million for the year. We're happy to make that offer to him. And Von Miller is now a Minnesota Viking as well. So taking a look at the team, guard is an area where the players on the Vikings roster are pretty lowly regarded, and there's not really anybody with a ton of potential. So that's an area that I'm going to search for in free agency. Could certainly use an upgrade at running back in addition to Orlando, and I did see that Trey Sermon was out there, so we're going to try to bring him on board as well. You can see that Von Miller actually between Lowry and Miller will likely pivot one of those guys to right defensive end, probably start one of them over Jacqueline Roy. So that might not be the worst signing in the world for us. Otherwise, defensively, got some cornerbacks with some potential. Safety were pretty solid. Again, I'm not building a team for the long term, so would spend a lot more time thinking about this and perusing free agency in a real full off season after we've played this game for a year. Right now, I'm just trying to, as I said, supplement this roster to hopefully make the Vikings as competitive as they can possibly be. So since we're looking for guards, we'll put in the guards here, and you can see there's actually a few interesting guys out there in terms of their potential. Colby Gossett is the best currently and has pretty high future potential. The rookie here, John Leglue, looks like he's got pretty high potential. Brandon Scherf is obviously an experienced player who has been in the NFL for about a decade at this point. But we'll see what Colby Gossett is looking for. His pass and his run block technique are both really good. His blocking strength is not great. I believe in the game that kind of is how long he's going to be able to continue holding those blocks. So certainly not optimal that he is not great there. But we can use someone better on the interior offensive line, and as you can see, he can play left guard, center, and right guard all with similar proficiency. So I think he would be an interesting player for us to consider adding. At this point, we're just going to sign these guys to the one-year deals that they're looking for. You've already seen how the negotiations work if you want to try to bring in a player for a longer deal. John Leglue is kind of interesting. He's an opposite almost of what we had with the other guard. His blocking strength is excellent right now. His technique is not incredible, but we think he can become a pretty darn good overall offensive lineman if he fully develops. So he's not particularly proficient at playing any positions right now. He's more of a developmental candidate than anything else, but given that the upside of most of the guards on our team right now is pretty low, we'll go after Leglue, and we are going to try to sign him since we think he's someone, even though he's 27, someone who could get a bit better. We're going to offer him just a $30,000 signing bonus, so just $10,000 a year for the 3 seasons. From my past experience with the game, that was kind of the minimum that you could offer when you were signing a player to a longer-term deal. I'm assuming that that's still applicable now. We'll find out shortly when we click Make This Offer. And he's willing to accept that. So we've got him locked up for 3 years if it turns out that he does develop, and with only a $30,000 signing bonus if we decide to cut him at some point in the future. Not going to be a lot of dead cap money that is negatively impacting our salary cap situation in future years. And as I mentioned, the last guy out there who I thought could help us is the running back Trey Sermon, who Seems like he's pretty much, in his overall impression, as good as some of the people on our team right now. Really good at hole recognition and elusiveness, has some pretty decent speed. Looks like he's a little bit more of a home run candidate, perhaps, than some of the guys that we might have on the team right now. Certainly, again, if I was building a team for the long term, I would know a lot more about how the rest of the guys on my team right now look in terms of their skills. Alexander Matson, pretty good strength also, not the most elusive player in the world. Okay at picking up the blitz, pretty brutal hands, route running, catching in traffic, not the most proficient receiver out of the backfield, although he's good at adjusting to the ball. He is a guy who can do a little bit of returning for us. So Madison, Myles Gaskin, another guy who's strong, good at recognizing the holes, but not exceptional relative to other running backs in the league. Ty Chandler, another guy with a similar profile, not a lot of speed, but pretty good strength, pretty good hole recognition, a little more balanced in terms of some of his other skills. Another guy who could return punts for us in a pinch. Kene Nwangwu, very good punt returner. That'll be something when we get down to making some final cuts. That's the type of thing that might get him to be able to make the roster, particularly if he was a real good special teams player. You want to have good players at kick and punt returns on your team eventually, because those are still an important part of the game. Last but not least, Dwayne McBride, pretty pedestrian skill set for him. Would think that he could certainly be a guy whose roster spot will be in jeopardy if we do end up signing Mr. Sermon. We'll just make him the 1-year offer to bring him on board. So now we have signed a number of free agents. We've got 75 players on our roster. So we are going to sim ahead now to start preparing for the actual exhibition games. And once we get to the point where the exhibition games are ready to begin, we're going to have to pare that roster down from 75 to 60. And as I said, we've now simmed ahead to right before the Seattle game, and we've got a pop-up here because we're about to play a game. We've got too many active players, and since I am an obsessive general manager type when playing these games, I don't let the game handle minor roster decisions. I honestly don't consider cutting 15 people to get to a 60-man roster for exhibition games to be a minor roster decision, but if you're more of a coach type player who's going to be into the playbook that we looked at earlier, and you don't care as much about the GM aspects, that's certainly something that you can check a box and let somebody make those kinds of decisions for you. But to me, that's the most interesting part of this game. So time to start making some cuts. And there are a lot of personality things that can ultimately help influence the decisions that you're making when you're thinking about cuts in team building. Taking a look at our quarterback, Kirk Cousins, he's got positive chemistry with Osborne and Jackson, negative chemistry with Naylor, and neutral chemistry with Justin Jefferson. Really wants to be on a winner. Pretty popular player. If Naylor were to be a guy that wasn't particularly talented, that might be a sign that he could be somebody that I want to release. But honestly, with that 53 future potential, Naylor is one of the more talented receivers on our team. So my hope is that by playing together a bit more, that's something that perhaps will evolve into more positive chemistry going forward. I'm not going to be obsessive about the decisions I make to get this roster down to 60. We talked about McBride being a guy that we might look to cut when we brought on Sermon, And certainly we aren't going to be going in with 6 running backs plus 2 fullbacks, so 8 backfield players on a 60-man roster. So we're going to have to make some cuts there. Dwayne McBride, who, as I talked about earlier, doesn't have an overwhelming profile in terms of his talent. When we look at the rest of our running backs and we look at his upside, he's one of the lower upside guys, and he's certainly the lowest in terms of his current value. So unfortunately, the 7th rounder out of Alabama Birmingham is going to be our first cut. And you can see that we'll save $750,000 in costs this year because drafted players are automatically signed in this game to the slotted type of contract that they would get. He did get a signing bonus to come into camp, which is going to count $30,000 against this year's cap and then $90,000 against next year's. So not a huge matter. You know, if he was a 2nd or 3rd round draft choice that we were cutting, that number would be more significant, but certainly not going to keep him around to save $90,000 next year. So we are going to go ahead and release Mr. McBride. That brings our roster down to 74. Not going to walk you through the rest of the cuts that we make, but that is the process. And one thing that I mentioned in my previous introductory video to Front Office Football 9 in terms of just the quality of life, I would love it if there was an option here for some of these lower rated players where there was a radio box where I could just click a bunch of them and then right click and release the player, or even if there was a way to right click on the player, which I am trying to do right now, but right clicking just turns him green and white, but it doesn't actually give me the ability to do anything. So it is a little bit of a pain that you have to go in to the player card here and then select the action to release the player rather than being able to do that a little more efficiently. But again, once you kind of get the team set up initially, not as big an issue. And we have pared the roster down to 60 players. One other thing, and I'm not going to get into it now in terms of my actual action, but in terms of finding a player, I've just been searching on current value and future value, but you can see there are a ton of different options you have here for finding players. So for instance, if I really needed to find a kickoff returner, I could search on current kickoff return ratings, and that's going to show me all of the players who are the top kickoff returners out there. If we look here at Kean Crossan, you can see he is a really potentially very good punt returner and kickoff returner. Not a particularly great overall player as a cornerback. You can see his not great against the run or pass rushing, which you wouldn't necessarily expect from a cornerback, but even his man-to-man defense, his physical pass defense, his pass intercepting are pretty weak. His defensive diagnosis is mediocre. He's pretty good in the zone, and he does have decent endurance. But this is a guy who might be one of the final players on your roster, but you do have the option to do some searching for players who fit a whole variety of different skill sets, which can certainly help you as you think about filling out those final spots of your roster. Like I said, like the safety here, Dion McMillan, who we think has potential to be a useful player down the line, or perhaps even the safety Jared Campaneris here, who is a decent player today and decent potential down the line, might be a good compromise candidate with a guy who's a decent kickoff returner today if we needed one, but we think who could also potentially become an interesting safety for us to maybe use in situations where we need 5 or 6 defensive backs on the field in future years. A little bit of potential there. Kind of interesting to see Raheem Mostert and Jamison Crowder, players like that, being on the free agency list here as well. So with our roster down to 60 players, we can move forward and get ready for this first exhibition game against Seattle. A couple other things to play with at this point. The management overview screen. Actually, that's not the screen I want to go to. I want to go to the strategy screen first. And here's where you can do offensive and defensive game planning, defensive analysis, blitzing plan, game plan settings. Tons of different options here for the different types of plans you want to put together with your playbook for different situations, by down, by the scenario that you're in. Again, I don't spend a ton of time with this. I'm much more interested in the GM mode than the manager mode, but there is a lot of customization that you can do in these different defensive settings. Do you want to double the team's best receiver? Yes or no? A bunch more actions here as far as your actual game plan. You can take a look at the players on the other teams, type of alignments to set up there. So tons of different things to do in the strategy. Blitzing plan. You can generate a new blitzing plan. Again, I tend to not get into the nuts and bolts of this too much. Default to letting my coach generate 95% of this stuff, and then I will just tweak some of it on the sides. What I do get involved in, though, is my team depth charts here on the managed team situation. And you can see that clearly our starter is Kirk Cousins right now. We're going to first erase this depth chart, and then we're going to ask the coordinator for a new one with the moves that we've made, and you can see that put the new guard John LeGlue into as a potential starter for us. Cameron Bynum is our kick returner. He's very highly regarded in those aspects, and he's also a very good safety for us. So clearly he'll be making the team. KJ Osborne, our punt returner, pretty important wide receiver for us as well. So feel pretty good in those specialist positions, but can tweak any of these settings here. If you want to look more deeply in all of your offensive linemen and kind of figure out who's starting, you can just drag and drop the players over. If I want to put Hakeem Adeniji as our right tackle instead of Uda, pretty simple to do that, but especially for purposes of a preseason game, we are just going to go with the defaults. Same thing with the skill positions here. Since we've made some changes, we're going to ask the coordinators for the depth chart here. And you can see, looking at this, these players who are marked in red are players who are in so many different personnel settings that they could be getting a little bit fatigued. As you see, the red highlight, the player may tire with expected usage. If this was a team that I was going to be playing for the real long term, particularly in the preseason, if I had a 6th round wide receiver that was likely not even to be on the game day roster, say, when we get to the regular season, he's the type of guy that I might be slotting in for Jefferson or Addison in some of these roles to get to see him a little bit more. But right now, I'm not going to get obsessive about that. You can see our new halfback Sermon is being used in some of the personnel settings alongside Alexander Madison, which is good to see. And our new fullback Morlando is in whenever we have a roster and personnel group that's going to require a fullback. Similar thing with defense. we've got some additions that we made there, and you can see that Von Miller is going to slide in. The new addition is our right defensive end in some cases, left defensive end in some others. And last but not least, our special teams. Ask the coordinator for our recommendations. There are some players that our coordinator or does not recommend using. Generally, those are probably going to be some of your starting players. You can see here, for example, Justin Jefferson, where actually our coordinator wants to use him on special teams because he does have very good special team skills, and he's also a pretty good kick returner. I am not going to have my dynamic playmaking wide receiver on special teams, so I'm actually going to discourage the use of Justin Jefferson in that role. Morlando, the guy that we just brought on, though, is a perfect candidate, a fullback who's not going to get a ton of playing time normally, but a very good special teams player. So love to have a guy like that there. You can see Harrison Smith, although he has a very high special teams rating, he again is a starting safety for us, and probably a guy that I don't want to risk getting injured on special teams, perhaps until we're in a playoff game or something where every play matters, but even then probably not. Not surprisingly, also our starting tight end TJ Hawkinson, not a guy that we're going to look to use on special teams. Same thing with Danielle Hunter. So you can modify those settings to the extent that you want, but I'm going to go with the defaults here. And then the last thing to figure out is your active roster. Fortunately, in exhibition games, all 60 players on the team can be active. When we get into the regular season, you're going to have a lot more trade-offs and decisions to make as far as getting down to the game day roster. But also, as we get into the regular season, you're going to have situations where there's a lot of players start getting banged up and injured, and sometimes that helps make the decisions a little easier when there are guys who are going to be out. And we could spend a lot of time playing through that Seattle game. I know in the comments to our previous review of front office football, some have asked me to simulate a game at some point, and I think I will do that at some point since there is demand for it to show what it looks like. But right now, that's not what I'm focusing on in this little mini tutorial series. So we're going to just run ahead to right after this Seattle game, and we'll take a look and see how the game went. And going to our team schedule play page, we got a win 30-22. Can go into the game book to get all of the information that we could possibly want. Our new fullback, Braxton Morlando, caught a 14-yard pass from Kirk Cousins. One of the things that I do like about this game, well, there's lots of things I like about this game, but you'll notice that Cousins was listed as our starter, as he will be in the regular season. But when we look at the player stats here, Cousins looks like he was basically only in for one or two series, which is more realistic in terms of how a player like him would be used in the preseason. The youngster Jaron Hall got most of the playing time. Myles Gaskin and Alexander Mattson both got some decent usage at running back. Our new guy Trey Sermon only had one carry. Taking a look at the receivers, Justin Jefferson actually had 6 targets, so he played a decent amount of time, 3 catches for 39 yards. Tight end Johnny Munt, who probably will be battling for a roster spot, did have 2 catches for 62 yards, so a nice performance from him. Can also look through all of your defensive statistics. Von Miller with a sack in his debut for us, which is nice to see. blocking statistics here, key run blocks, key run opportunities, pancakes, etc., sacks allowed. Colby Gossett allowed 1 sack. He was only on for 17 passing plays. Our new young guard, John LeGlue, 0 for 1 on key run blocking opportunities. He was only on for 9 running plays and 15 passing plays, given that it's a preseason game. But a lot of different guys got some playing time there. More and more statistics and stats that you can look at. You can look at the turnover information, how your kickers did. Ryan Wright had a big day punting for us, and Greg Joseph, pretty productive day where he was 3 for 3 on field goals, 3 for 3 on extra points, and kickoffs, had 7 of them, and I believe that 4 of them went through the end zone, but I'll have to check and make sure that's the stat that they're keeping here. Directional rushing statistics, passing breakdowns by distance, detailed receiving statistics, more advanced passing metrics here, how many times were your quarterbacks hurried, et cetera, how often did they throw down the field. So just a lot of interesting stuff to look at. Again, if I were really playing through a long-term sim with this team, I'd be spending a lot more time kind of getting to know the players well, getting to know their tendencies, getting to know where they work well and where they don't work well. Again, this is more just a brief tutorial / preview of the game, so not going to go into any deeper excruciating detail here than I already have with you. And perhaps the most positive thing about that first exhibition game is that nobody injured. So football is obviously a very rough game. There's going to be injuries, and there's going to be significant injuries over the course of the season, but always a positive thing when you don't suffer any in a preseason game. And another week, another preseason win for our Vikings over the Tennessee Titans. Looks like Kirk Cousins played a bit more through touchdown passes to both Addison and Hawkinson. So that is very positive. Cousins, 11 of 19 passing, so he got some more significant play, was named player of the game. Looks like Tannehill had a bit of a rough outing for Tennessee. The rookie Levis impressed. Could be interesting to see how long Mr. Tannehill holds on to that job in Tennessee in this simulation over the course of this year. And a final W in the final preseason game. So a 3-0 preseason for our Vikings, 27-10 win over the Cardinals. Very little playing time, I think, for Kirk Cousins in this final game. Yeah, it looks like he just played the first series, was 3 for 3. I could have tweaked the settings to ensure that our third string quarterback got a little bit of playing time if it was a situation where I was really playing this for the long term. What I probably would have done is benched Cousins for this game and then let Jaron Hall and Nick Mullins both get a little bit of playing time in the final preseason game. But again, I'm not focused on building this perfectly for the long term. So a solid exhibition season for Buffalo. Unfortunately, the cornerback Andrew Booth is doubtful. Did finally get an injury in that third preseason game. Strained triceps, going to have a 4-week impact for him. Re-injury risk is low, but he's still listed as doubtful, so tend to think he will probably be an unhealthy scratch for the first game of the regular season against Tampa Bay. But we'll see how he recovers. It's only September 4th. we've got 6 days until that game. So there is certainly time for things to evolve as far as that injury. And as we get ready for the season, you can look and see what the injury situation looks like for some other teams. Go to event logs and the injury log, and we can see that August 13th, during that first preseason game against Cleveland, Dalvin Cook and Aaron Rodgers had some injuries for the Jets. Severity, there's some very serious injuries out there. Damian Harris, the running back from Buffalo, an elbow tendon tear, may need to have surgery. So the injuries definitely come fast and furious in this game. Feel like we are really fortunate to have only had the one injury that we experienced, because it looks like with just one guy who's banged up, we are in a much better position right now than a lot of these teams are in terms of their injury situations, and the regular season hasn't even started yet. And now we've simmed up ahead to right before the start of the season. You can see we've got a 60-man roster, and the simulation is halted here as we get to game number 1 because we've got too many active players, and once again we're controlling that ourselves. So now we are in the situation where we are going to have to pare this roster down further and also make some decisions about who our active players are going to be. The main thing I'm going to focus on right now is just paring down the roster, and what we may look to do is see if there is any value in the trade market for some of the last couple players that we will be cutting. And as I mentioned, I was going to look for some value as we try to get from 60 players down to 53. It's a bit of a tedious process. I'm not aware of a way to shop a player to all teams, which would help. So you have to kind of do it team by team and try to find some teams with some needs. But Kenny Nwangwu, who is a young running back for our team, 25 years old, was a 4th-round pick. Don't see him making the roster, and Washington is willing to give us a 4th and a 6th for him. So we are going to go ahead and complete that trade. Going to continue looking at whether we can get any value at all for some of the final guys on our roster as we pare things down to 53 from 60 before we finish up this episode. And we've made the rest of our cuts to get the roster down to 53 players. So a little bit of progress there. Unfortunately, the only guy that we cut who had any trade value whatsoever was the trade that we already talked to. So we got a 4th and a 6th in return for a running back who was not a big part of our team this year, particularly with the additions of Morlando and Sermon in free agency. So that was not the worst return in the world to improve our draft capital in the mid to late rounds next year a little bit. So at the start of the next episode, we're going to get into the regular season. So although we've got 53 players on the roster now, we're going to still need to figure out the 6 who aren't going to be active for our opening day against Tampa Bay. And then we're also going to be spending a little more time on the lineups and the roster decisions there to ensure that we don't put ourselves in a position where we're going to have potentially a bunch of guys who are incredibly tired with our lineups. So we'll spend some time on that in the next episode, but hopefully this helped those of you who are newer to the game as to some of the things to think about during the preseason as you're getting the season ready to go. And we will jump into the 2023 regular season with our Minnesota Vikings. in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.